up, everyone? Welcome back to Moments with the Marcelins. My name is Jun.
And my name is Stephanie.
And we are the Marcelins. Our moments together will be centered around three things: transparency, tools, and truth.
Yes, on this week's episode, we had the amazing opportunity to interview Jennifer Duncan. She is a facilitator of grief and trauma at the American Bible Society, and we honestly had the opportunity to do a 6-week course with them earlier this year. And on this interview, we just kind of dive in deep on the journey of healing, what is
6 stages of grief.
It's so much stuff. And so we know that you're going to be honestly blessed by this interview, kind of even, opening up to things that she went through in her life along with us and stuff like that. So this conversation is going to honestly just impact our lives.
Definitely. So make sure you get your pens, notebooks out, get ready to take some notes, and hope you enjoy this conversation. Well, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to Moments with the Marcelins. My name is Jun.
And my name is Stephanie.
And today we have a very special guest who is with us today. Her name is Jennifer Duncan, and she works with the American Bible Society. And so she'll share a little bit more about what this organization is and what it is that she does. But we had to have her on this podcast because we believe that she has something just so amazing to share. So Jennifer, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here with you guys.
Absolutely. So if you wouldn't mind letting our listeners know just a little bit about yourself and the work that you're doing with the American Bible Society.
Yeah. So like June said, I work at the American Bible Society. We have a ministry called the Trauma Healing Institute, and it's a global ministry. It's domestic and global, but we do trauma healing all around the world. The trauma healing that we do is a combination of scripture and counseling best practices. It was first formed in the Congo region when there were tribal wars going on, and we came into that area. And actually, one of my former colleagues his family went through the tribal wars in the Congo, and that's how we started this program to kind of, he shared his story with us, and we started doing trauma healing in the Congo region. But my region that I focus on is the Middle East and Eastern Europe. So I work with leaders in those countries to strategize how to build the program out and to reach those who are hurting most within those countries. So,
yeah, that's amazing work. And so how we actually got in contact with Jennifer is we were part of a cohort with NALIC, the National Latino Evangelical Coalition. And within this cohort, they were doing a trauma, healing course. And so we found it so beneficial. We're already very, pro counseling, very aware of like mental health and all of that and how that kind of ties into scripture and the word of God and all of that kind of stuff. But it took it an extra step when it kind of started talking about trauma and grief. And it was so interesting that these things were discussed in like a group dynamic, which was very new to me.
Yeah.
Normally these things are kind of like maybe like a lecture or, maybe like a sermon or a class, you know what I mean? It was very different, the type of dynamic that you all taught the course, which for me was super beneficial, but it was so different. And so if you can maybe touch on, the impact that you've seen in these group settings, having these discussions, really just kind of opening up that type of forum. Because of course, when you think about trauma, when you think about grief, these are very, high sensitive conversations, and you guys just navigate that so amazing, to be honest. And so, any feedback in regards to that, really the impact that these small groups and this type of dynamic has had.
You bring up such a great point, Steph, because we do the trauma healing within a group setting. And I really believe healing happens in community. And when one steps into a healing group and there's some fear that's there because there are wounds that they may have in their heart, maybe carrying for years. And the fear of what if I open up, or what will happen when I start looking at these wounds that have happened to me? or am I the only one who's experienced this? But when you're in a group setting with other individuals and you're able to hear the pain that they've gone through and the compassion and empathy that comes with that, you realize that you're really not alone. Your story may look a lot different, but you're not walking the journey alone. And it's like the whole group kind of carries each other's burdens in a way. So it's not just you and a counselor or you and a professional, but you're beginning your journey with other wounded hearts. And sometimes those individuals are the best, like companion or healer to walk alongside you because they've gone through it themselves. So the group dynamic, I really believe we're created to be in community, and I believe healing happens through community. Mm-hmm. And we have noticed, it was about a year ago, I did a healing group, and a lady had been in counseling for years, chronic trauma since her childhood. And she came to a healing group and things were able to be revealed within the healing group that what she wasn't able to accomplish after years of counseling. Now, I believe in counseling. I think people should really pursue that. Yeah. But there are some things that happen within the group setting and the way that we do our curriculum. It's been studied and tested all around the world where it helps to just pull back those layers and those wounds in a way that is safe and in a way that may bring you to like another step in your healing process that you may not have been expecting. So, and we've just published some research through Baylor University where they, I don't know if you guys have seen this, but they've tested, not tested, but kind of like did some research on our curriculum with inmates and have seen drastic changes for those who've suffered from PTSD. So months after doing the healing group, they've seen behavior changes and things like that. So
yeah, that's so exciting. That's so exciting. And one of the things that I was really kind of taken back by in the group is, anybody who steps into these groups already has like an internal belief, you know what I mean? That, and again, maybe not everybody, but probably the majority of the people that were in our group specifically had different cultural beliefs that, you have to hide certain things. There's a restraint on like vulnerability. You know what I mean? There's hesitations within all of that, but it was so freeing to see that as one person shared their story, then someone else was open to share their story. And how, even reading certain stories within the curriculum, you felt like you saw yourself in that, or you experienced something like that in there, so that there was freedom within, the entire session. So it really was very, very powerful.
Yeah, I was definitely impacted as well. I love that. I look forward to our Monday evenings and just getting ready to ask questions. And that you all also do is that you had different facilitators as well. Can you kind of touch on what was the strategy behind having more than one facilitator leading these groups?
Yeah, there's a few reasons for that, but so we all have different strengths and we all have different stories, and having more than one person in the room allows for individuals to connect with either that facilitator's story or that facilitator's strengths. But also we did ours online because of COVID, but when I've done it in person, there have been certain times where individuals may feel triggered with like the story or too much overwhelmed with like some emotion, and they have to step out of the room. So it's helpful to have another facilitator who can kind of take care of the group setting, and the other one to walk out with someone who just needs like one-on-one care. So we want the group to be really cared for. We want there to be, more than one person in the room, because if there are individual needs, we're able to meet those needs as well. So,
yeah.
And you're not just looking at one person the whole time, which can kind of get boring.
For sure. Stephanie kind of touched on something that kind of want to go deeper into that, where she kind of discussed the different cultures. There's several different cultures. We have, we talk about church culture, society's culture, that may have a different perspective on what trauma is and what trauma isn't. And so I guess it's a two-part question. One, if you wouldn't mind describing those cultures, and also just kind of sharing, what is trauma, defining what trauma is, because that might mean something different to someone that is listening.
Yeah. So I'll start with the first part of your question, the different types of culture. I think in our group, it was really interesting because we had a lot of pastors, and I feel like it's really hard to be vulnerable for people in those positions to be vulnerable. So that added a layer to, just the fear of being vulnerable and the fear of sharing our stories. And their position was a difficult piece. But talking about cultures, the most challenging is for this type of work is the honor shame culture, which we see a lot in Asia and actually in the Appalachian region of the United States. Those two pieces is like, you kind of have to look like you have it all together. It's really not okay to be weak. And you don't want to dishonor your family or bring dishonor on your community by sharing what really happened. So those cultures make it more challenging. And really, my context is the Middle East and Eastern Europe countries. The challenges that I've seen within those cultures have just been, it's mostly an honor shame culture, really. So it's getting people to know that it's safe to open up. They don't usually trust very well, or especially people in authority. So letting them know and getting to a place that it's okay to really open up. And depending on what context, I've heard from the leaders in the Middle East, they don't trust the other participants in the room because of different political views, or especially where there's in the Middle East, there's a lot of wars and conflicts that go on. So
yeah,
those are some challenges that come up with cultures.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting because even growing up myself, I was exposed to several different cultures and how they handle it. And so I'm like, which one is right? So it's interesting because, like, on one hand, it's like my family is from Haiti. And so very strict culture is just kind of like what happens at home, it stays at home. You just kind of deal with it. But at the same time, I was first generation born here in the States. I was raised in a predominantly African-American culture, urban area. And so it was like, you don't expose weakness or share weakness because then you're prey.
Yeah.
And so you have to, boys don't cry, from the time you're a little kid, you don't cry. You have to be tough or else you're deemed weak. And then, unfortunately, and sad to say, even in certain church, and I say church cultures, because it was like, okay, you just pray it away. You get what I'm saying? And so I'm like, man, all of these, none of these are right.
None of them are right.
It has to stay at home. I have to be tough. And I just got to pray about it.
Yeah.
So like, it took me a while to really just kind of like unlearn a lot of things and learn what it is to how to actually deal with this thing we do call trauma.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the unlearning part is very difficult, and the key to unlearn well is to go to the source of truth, which is scripture. And that's like one of our lessons where we just look at what did Jesus do in the situation when Lazarus died? What did he do? He wept. When he met with these people who needed healing, what did he do? He had compassion and he was moved and he did something about it. He didn't hide it. Even when he was beaten on the cross, it wasn't something that was hidden. He shared his pain with his disciples, and he was vulnerable with them. All of those
sure.
different layers. It's like we have to filter through them.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the first sessions of the class that really kind of helped like lay the groundwork of like what we were going to be discussing and kind of talking about is when you all kind of defined what the word trauma is.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote it down, and it was like intense fear, helplessness, or horror.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we live life and we think that things just happen to us and we just survived these moments, but we didn't know that we actually went through a traumatic experience in life.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And that spoke so much to me, because then I started breaking down, you know what I mean? Like these, like, I guess, pivotal moments in life. And I was like, wow, that was actually traumatic. Like that wasn't just, an issue that, you faced or anything like that, but that was honestly trauma. And then, wow, now that makes sense as to, everything else that can happen after that. So, you know what I mean? It was just really like big to kind of see that and to find that, and how then those traumas create wounds of the heart. And so would you mind kind of speaking about the wounds of the heart, kind of just what that is, and defining, how those things then impact us in life?
Yeah. So there are, like you said, Steph, there are some experiences in life that are very painful. They can cause deep suffering that lasts for a long time. And that's what we call trauma. So trauma is a deep wound of the heart and the mind that takes a long time to heal. It hurts every part of our lives. It hurts how we relate to others. It may hurt how our body feels, what we think about ourselves, and how much we can trust God. It can make us feel separated from God and others. This happens a lot of times because you're carrying these wounds and you're with other people and you don't think they can really relate. And sometimes they can't. And your wounds may be deeper and may cause, side effects or different things that you're carrying on the inside that other people don't really know about. So that might make you feel separated or lonely. We may feel like we're no longer the same person as before the trauma occurred. And trauma can be a single event, or it can be a prolonged event. It can be repeated events. So it can be someone who's in a chronic domestic abuse situation that goes on for years and years. And it could be a child who is abused again and again and again. And that could result in complex trauma. So like you said, it overwhelms with intense fear, helplessness, or horror. Usually those three things are always present. And there's always grief involved with trauma. So trauma always includes some type of loss. It could be loss of virginity, loss of a loved one, loss of choice. It could be loss of opportunity or loss of job, but there's always grief involved with trauma. But grief in itself does not always include trauma. So let me explain. So
that's good.
Right.
If you have like an elderly grandparent, for example, who is about to pass away, and you may be feeling grief because they're passing away, but you may not feel trauma because they're passing away. But if you go through a traumatic event, there will always be some sort of loss that's involved with that. Loss of identity, even, or there could be layers of losses. And it's important to grieve those losses that are included with trauma, because if we don't grieve things that have happened to us, those wounds can really stay on the inside and come out in different ways. But yeah.
That's so good.
Yeah, definitely. How would you compare a heart wound from a physical wound?
That's a great question, June. And it's really one of the favorite lessons that we kind of talk about it in our curriculum. It's my favorite one. Sorry, I'm not directly answering it. It's my favorite one because I grew up in a home where you just tough it up. You just like suck down the tears and you keep going. You don't let anything stop you. So this really opened my eyes. And when I looked at a heart wound, you would say, how does it compare to a physical wound? Okay, so a heart wound, you can't see it like you could see a physical wound. Like if I had a cut on my arm, you would see that it was bleeding, or that I needed stitches, and you would take me to a hospital, right? You would know what to do, hopefully, with me if I had something going on over here. But with a heart wound, it's not something you can visibly see, not like you're not going to see blood dripping out, but you'll see some behavior changes.
Yeah.
You'll see, maybe within someone's countenance that you could see something's going on there. And also with a heart wound, there's a lot of similarities to a physical wound. It takes time to heal a heart wound, and it takes time to heal a physical wound. If you have a broken bone, the doctor, you're in a cast for a while. You're not walking around. You're not using your arm, whatever is broken. It may take medicine to heal that physical wound. And the same with a heart wound. You might need to go to be on some antidepressants for a bit, or see a counselor. You need to go to a professional doctor if you have a physical wound. You need to seek help, and the same with a heart wound. So there's so many similarities. If a heart wound is ignored, it will attract, like drugs, alcohol, something to numb it. If a physical wound is ignored, it's going to attract flies, and it's going to smell bad. It's not going to look good. There's so many similarities between the two, and we know what to do with a physical wound. And a lot of times we're not prepared to find healing for a heart wound.
Yeah, it's interesting because something else that kind of comes up to mind along with that is that, a physical wound, you get a scab, and it automatically, the body knows what to do. It heals itself automatic. When we talk about the heart, it doesn't have an automated healing system. And it's like you said, until you address those issues within the heart, 5, 10, 15 years can pass by, and you're still on day one. And you say to yourself, and I know there's been times in my life where, this happened years ago. I should be over this. Sure, time. And people always say, time heals all wounds. That statement in itself, it sounds good, but it is incomplete. Right. Time heals if you do what is necessary to deal with that. And so in my life, even when we talk about forgiveness, and we'll get into that a little bit later, but sometimes you do it in faith and the feelings will follow, but you have to address those areas. And so, oftentimes we're walking around, like you said, with wounds, and we don't even know it until a moment, happens. Something triggers it.
The behavior comes out, an allergy, and then you have questions about, right? Where did this come from? So how would you say that someone should actually heal those heart wounds? What would that process look like? And is it linear?
Good question. So the process, there's a few ways. You want to start by cleaning the heart wound, and similar to a physical wound, we would clean a physical wound. And the way that we would clean out, or get the wound to the surface at least, would be sharing our story. So finding someone who can listen well, who's safe, who isn't going to bring the story back to themselves, but really wants to ask intentional questions to bring about healing within you. So we have 3 questions that we ask, that we do in a listening exercise. And let me see if I can remember them. What happened? How did it make you feel? And what was the hardest part? So those 3 questions are pretty helpful when sharing your story, especially how did it make you feel? Because healing happens at the level of emotion. So if you're just sharing, if you're sharing your story and you're just sharing the details of what time it was and where you were located and who the person was, those are good details for sharing a story, and that's good to share those. But if you're able to dig deeper in the darkest moment of your story, when it was the most painful, if you're able to share how did it make you feel when that person did that to you, which is really hard. That pay attention to the emotions that come out when you share, how did it make you feel? Because if you're able to listen to those emotions and observe those emotions and work through them, that's when healing happens. It happens at the level of emotion. So those are, you want to share your story. And sometimes there's not words to explain it. And when that happens, and I've been in situations myself where I don't feel like I have the words. We do something called the art exercise, where it engages a different part of your brain, where it's not like the logical part or the strategic part of your brain. It's just, you're able to like draw out your pain by using colors, you're using words, using whatever kind of comes to your mind. And you'll really be surprised by what you create. Because you're not thinking too much about it, and you're able to really bring out what's really going on and sharing that with someone. So those two things are really helpful. So sharing your story or drawing it out, getting it out. And then I also really believe in a community, like a safe community, to walk with you through it. And I don't think it's linear, to answer the second part of your question.
Yeah.
You might walk through a certain layer of like a layer of healing, and then it may feel like you're good to go, and then something else may happen. That's what happened with the lady who I was mentioning earlier. She'd been in professional counseling for a while, and then when she came to our group, she realized that there was more inside that she hadn't tapped into yet, and she was able to bring that out and talk to a counselor about that. So, I don't think it's necessarily linear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
You bring up a good point. And it kind of brings to my mind, when we talk about the community, what would you say are the do's and don'ts of helping someone dealing and navigating through trauma? This may sound common sense, but some people really need to hear this. So.
That's a good question. Do's and don'ts within the community. Is it specifically to those who are leading, or?
Whether you're in a group, whether you're assisting maybe someone just came
someone
up.
that you know what I mean, went through a traumatic experience,
right?
Or you know what I mean? Yeah. It's in this process of just pain, and maybe they don't have the words to even articulate that they're going through something traumatic, but we've all been there where we've lost someone, and then someone said something and you just look at them like, you really just said that, you know what I mean, or something along those lines. So,
and I think she touched on some of the do's as far as the 3 questions to ask, and
that was really good.
Of the community. Get some don'ts.
This has literally happened to me, and I would highly recommend that no one does this. I was meeting with a pastor one time, was ready to share something really hard. I hadn't told anyone about this, and he probably for 15 minutes kept looking at his phone, like sending text messages, answering phone calls. And as I was sitting there, like my heart was beating really fast. I was like, had built up so much energy to finally talk to someone about this, and they were like constantly on their cell phone. I know that, and this pastor was probably been a pastor for like 30 some years. So it could be anyone, but you really want to, if someone is coming to you and they trust you enough to be vulnerable with the pain in their heart, and especially if you're in a Christian environment, God has placed you in a role to care for his sheep, then it's important before God and as a human individual to spend time and focus on them, remove distractions, give good body language, be ready to ask deeper questions, and be prepared to follow up with this is a place that I think you need to go. These are some tools or resources that might be helpful. Be prepared with something like that. There was another don't that I have is you want to don't bring, if someone's like, hey, can I talk to you in person? You don't want to bring them into a space that's your family is like, say you bring them over to your house and your family's walking in and out. This has happened before too. And you don't know who's listening. Maybe their children are listening or their husband, and you don't want the whole family to know everything that you want to talk about. So a quiet place where they feel comfortable to share with you. So you don't look at your cell phone the whole time, and don't bring them to a space that's not like confidential. That's other people aren't going to listen in and hear.
Yeah.
So. Absolutely. Within this healing process, we've all heard that there is, a journey of grief, or there's stages of grief. And like you had mentioned, healing isn't linear. Sorry. So can you kind of talk through these stages of grief and, how we sometimes even bounce between these different stages as well?
Yeah. So we have something, it's called the different villages. And it's, if you can imagine in your mind that there's like a road with three villages along the road, or three places to stop along that road. The first one is called denial and anger. And this is the grief journey. The first stop is denial and anger on the grief journey. And this is right after the crisis or the death has occurred. A lot of people who are in the denial and anger village will feel numbness. They may be unaware of what's happening around them. They may suddenly start to cry or erupt with anger, and they may be angry at God. And they may be in this village. I think it's could be 1 to 2 months, but some people could be longer, some people could be shorter. Yeah. So that's the first village that someone who's going through grief would go to first. The second one is no hope. And someone who is in this village, the emotions they would experience is sadness, a lot of hopelessness, unable to really organize their life. They may be longing for the dead person to come back. They may feel lonely, suicidal. They may be avoiding the pain with drugs and alcohol or other addictions. And this is the darkest part of the grief journey, the hardest part of the grief journey. And someone could stay in this for a long time. And there could be moments where they go from no hope, and they may be there for a while, and then jump back to denial and anger, where, especially if it's a situation where someone was murdered or a life was taken before by someone else in some way, they could go to no hope and then go back to anger, like, why did they do this? I want to get revenge. I don't forgive them. I hate this person. Like, so they could go back and forth between those villages. And then the third one is new beginnings. And this is when someone starts thinking about moving on to a new life. And so you can kind of notice this. I worked with a lady who was in a domestic abuse situation. And when I knew she was ready in the new beginnings village, it was when she decided she wanted to start dating again. So it could be, it's like, whether it's a loss of a spouse or loss of a child, and they want to start like maybe thinking about having a child again, whatever it may be, they may start to thinking about moving on to a new life and new beginnings. But there are certain triggers that may happen along the way. It could be Christmas, could be this person's birthday, or the annual remembrance of when they passed away. When those moments happen, individuals usually go back to that no hope village, and they can remain there for a while even, and then they could go back to new beginnings. So it's not a linear like process.
Right.
And yeah, so they can go back and forth in between them. I have seen it where individuals, after the crisis, they want to go straight to new beginnings. They don't want to go through no hope, which is a very dark journey, and they'll go right to new beginnings. Usually these people, I don't know if this is all the time, but they're usually pretty positive and they don't like to experience negative emotions. So they'll start working right away. They'll start like getting really busy and just like trying to find, exciting new things constantly. This is like a disaster waiting to happen because they don't adequately or correctly grieve. In order to grieve well, you have to experience those emotions of no hope and sadness and anger and loneliness. You kind of have to go through those emotions and come out on the other end. There's not a shortcut through it. And if you don't do that, there can be really bad repercussions. Like people can get physically sick. The grief lingers on them for years when like 15 years later, if you bring up the death, they could cry as if they're right there in front of the casket. So it's really important to go through the emotions to get out on the other side in a way that's healthy.
Yeah, I can personally attest to that. I lost my father in 2008. And it was very traumatic because, the night prior, he went to church. I remember putting on his tie. I remember the tie. I remember everything like it was yesterday. And I remember just telling him, hey, I love you. And that was the last time that we spoke to each other because he would go to work in the morning. I was probably like asleep that day. And so he went to work as normal. And then I get a phone call that your dad fell at work. And I was like, okay, my dad fell. I didn't know to the level of seriousness it was. And so I remember getting to the emergency room and seeing all these IVs hooked up to him. And unfortunately, 6 days later, he passed away. And yeah, and I had just turned 20. Everything in life was kind of going well. I was a youth pastor, first time being a youth pastor at 19 years old, and just celebrate my 20th birthday. Everything's going great. And then this just kind of happens. And I can just remember just a community of just support and being around me. And while that was great, anyone who suffers loss of someone that they love, they know that, after the funeral, after everything, you're not, people kind of go back to living their lives as normal. And so text messages aren't as frequent. People aren't visiting as much. People aren't calling as much. And that's just a part of life. You just kind of navigate through that. But what happened for me was what you said. It's like, I didn't want to feel those negative emotions. I didn't want to feel a place of no hope. And so I'm typically an optimistic person. And so I said to myself, hey, and this is not even understanding the stages of grief. This is a 20-year-old, not even trying to figure this thing called life out. And so I skipped all those other stages. And I was like, hey, this is a new beginning. I'm strong. I'm going to be strong in the Lord, because I was dealing with some other type of cultures of, don't like, again, like I alluded to earlier, all these different types of cultures. And so it was that first Father's Day. I remember without my dad, I'm like, it hit me like a ton of bricks. And so I know what that is for people to kind of skip those stages. And I love how you touched on that healing process is not something that is linear. And it's also something that you cannot shortcut. There's no shortcut when it comes to healing. And oftentimes when things kind of happen, for survival mode, we can kind of compartmentalize it. At least that's one of the things that I do. Just kind of the environment that I grew up in. And while that might help you in one arena, that same thing that works in one arena is not going to help you out in another arena. And so I'm so glad that you kind of touched on that, because that was my story personally, that I tried to skip that stage.
Thank you for sharing that, June. Yeah, I know so many people can relate with that.
Yeah.
Jennifer, what advice would you give to someone dealing with trauma right now?
Yeah, the first thing that comes to my mind is don't suffer in silence. There's like, your life is important and what you've gone through was significant, and you're valued enough to get resources and get help and get walk through the healing journey. And I keep saying the word journey because it's not a once and done situation. And then the other thing that I would say, and I know, I don't know everyone's story. Some people may have experienced trauma in church and different situations. But for me, the most substantial part of my healing was, my relationship with the Lord. That was my anchor, and that was my strength. And that was the piece of my story that I like clung to for life. So I really feel like he's the ultimate healer. God's the ultimate healer. I really believe in that. And I know not everyone has great experiences with church, or maybe they've had difficulties there, but that is, I really believe that getting close to the Lord is something that will bring about healing. And when one has gone through dark moments, there is an opportunity, I believe, to find an intimate place with the Lord that isn't really able to be accomplished otherwise. When you're desperate and you're broken, and you've seen things that many people haven't seen or experienced that are horrific, I believe the Lord comes close to the brokenhearted. And in those moments, we can experience a divine and supernatural peace that isn't able to be explained by this world. And that is where a lot of healing happens. Yeah.
Absolutely. Have you ever had a moment in your life where, can you share of a moment where God kind of showed up in that moment of darkness in your life?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I'll share a little bit of background before I get there. So I grew up in a home, it was kind of normal until I was 9. My mom started doing drugs and alcohol pretty hard when I was 9 years old, and I was the oldest of 3 girls. So my youngest sister was born when I was 9. So I started basically becoming a mom to her. So I would wake up at night and give her a bottle, and a lot of times wouldn't go to school because my mom would be passed out. And my dad lived with us, but he's an extreme workaholic. I've never met anyone like him. He sleeps 3 hours a night. I'm not kidding. I'm not exaggerating. The rest of the time he works. So I grew up in that atmosphere. By the time I was 12, my mom ended up dying of a drug overdose. And at that moment, I got really angry at the Lord. It had been years of like me raising an infant, basically, I felt like. And then my mom, when she was intoxicated, was quite abusive. So I was protecting my sisters. I have a whole lot of stories. I won't share them all with you. And then by the time I was 12, she ended up dying, and it was just a lot for me. But during that time, my younger sister ended up becoming a Christian, and someone invited her to church at school. She met someone at school and invited her to church, and she began praying for our family and praying for me. And then she went away she graduated from high school and went away to college to prepare for ministry. And she came home on the weekend to visit us. And on her way home, my sister ended up dying in a car accident. So I lost my mom. And then shortly, not too long after, maybe 3 years later, lost my sister. And it was at that moment, I lost all hope. I was ready to commit suicide, just being completely honest. I was completely broken. I was, there had been a lot of things that had happened. My dad actually ended up moving out, and it was just me in our house with my sisters for a while, like a whole lot of things. I was 15 when he moved out. So just a lot of responsibility. But my sister who passed away, she was a Christian, and we ended up having the funeral at her church. And I was standing in front of her casket. It was a closed casket because the accident was so horrible. And I just started praying, and I said, God, please forgive me of my sins. I surrender to you. And I just said, please hold me, because I felt like I was falling apart. And I felt the presence of God so real. Like no one in this world could ever tell me that God's not real. I felt peace. I felt joy. I felt hope. I felt purpose for my life. And that was so significant to me because there were so many years of a lot of pain and a lot of responsibility and a lot of like unknowns, a lot of fear, a lot of neglect, and a lot of grief. But then it was like I felt peace for the first time almost. I felt like God was really there. He was really real. Like, and that I just clung to that. I just started reading his word and trying everything I could just to hold close to him, because that's what I felt like that's all I had in that moment. And that's why I'm really passionate about this work, because it includes not only the tools to help people who've gone through situations like me, but it includes the opportunity for them to experience the Lord and know his truth and release their pain to him, because I really believe that he desires to heal our hearts. And I believe those moments of pain and those moments of brokenness give us opportunity to experience his peace and his presence in ways that we're not really able to do otherwise, maybe because we're not desperate enough or not broken enough. I don't know. I'm sure there's a theology around it and I'm not getting it all right, but there's opportunity there and there's blessing there in the pain that we don't want to miss out on, for sure.
Thank you so much for being vulnerable and sharing your story. And just as I listen to you, even though our stories are different, there's a sense of healing that even comes from me when you share your story. And so the power of a story. And so thank you so much again for sharing that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And so, the American Bible Society is, doing amazing work when it comes to this entire course curriculum, teaching everything like that. And, I'm sure that there's a lot of people who have questions or want to get connected or, want to reach out and maybe share their own story with you and stuff like that. How can someone get in contact with you or maybe even join one of these groups in the future or anything like that?
Yeah. So on our website, it's traumahealinginstitute.org, I think. Trauma healing. Yeah, that's right. Okay. Go to our website.
The Bible as well.
Yeah. And on the events tab, it will tell you what events and healing groups we have coming up. And you can register there for those events. And even if you're listening to this right now and you're feeling like, I don't know if I have trauma, but I have, these things that I want to work through, don't hesitate to do it. I think the whole experience, it's worth it. And you'll meet people, you'll it won't be a negative experience. I guarantee you. So take the step and register for a healing group. If you want to email me, my email is jduncan, DUNCAN, @americanbible.org. So feel free to reach out if you have questions. But yeah, that's what we want to do, is just help people find healing and find Jesus. So
absolutely. And we can speak from experience. We loved it.
Recommend it. 10 out
And
of
we
10.
highly recommend it. We actually got our certification as well
Yeah.
to
Yes.
lead some groups too. And so there are
looking for those opportunities.
There are opportunities for that. If you one day, you say, hey, I've gone through this course, and hey, I feel like there's some people that I know that I want to share this with. And so it's just a continuous cycle. And so thank you. Are there any final thoughts or anything that you'd like to share before we conclude?
Well, I did want to say, Jun and Steph, you guys are going to be great trauma healing leaders. I think you guys will be, I highly recommend. Any words? Just Romans 5:8 comes to my mind. It talks about our suffering produces perseverance, character, hope. And then when you think about hope, what's so special about hope? This thought came to my mind, like perseverance and character are so significant, but hope, when I did some research on it, hope is, it's a change of direction. It's something in your journey where you think there's going to be a change. So if you look at the scripture, what's a symbol of hope in the Bible? It's the dove, because after the flood, the dove brought the olive leaf to Noah. And it's that hope that the storm is over and they're going to land that ship soon. So whatever journey you're on, know that your suffering will produce this hope that the great flood is going to be over soon. The dove is going to bring the olive leaf and Noah can land the ship. So whatever journey you're on, just know that there's hope, that there's healing, that nothing is impossible through the Lord. And we're here to help and be a resource for you. So it's been a blessing to be with you guys, and thank you for this time. I appreciate it.